What occurred in Dubai during the early operational hours represents the most severe systemic collapse of a regional security architecture observed in modern military analysis. Within a strictly compressed timeline measuring exactly 90 minutes from the first recorded radar anomaly to the cessation of primary kinetic impacts, the urban center functioning as the primary financial and logistical node of the emerging multipolar global economy absorbed a highly coordinated precision strike campaign. The mathematical scale and technical sophistication of this deployment rendered the comprehensively integrated American supplied air defense network structurally incapable of executing meaningful interception protocols. The Burj Khalifa, an architectural monolith that required 4 decades of national capital accumulation and engineering investment to construct into a permanent symbol of Gulf economic invulnerability, no longer exists within the regional skyline. The structure is not partially damaged. It has not sustained superficial scarring or localized fire events. It is entirely gone. This specific physical monument, long serving as a vertical testament to the concept of borrowed international security, was systematically dismantled and brought down to its foundational footprint by advanced munitions that existing international sanction frameworks and non-proliferation regimes were theoretically designed to prevent from ever reaching operational maturity. The immediate administrative response to this localized systemic collapse provides the most crucial metric for assessing the true viability of the established security paradigm. Within 3 hours of the initial kinetic impact sequence, the sovereign leadership of the United Arab Emirates initiated and executed a total airborne evacuation from the capital city of Abu Dhabi. The executive governance structure was not relocated to hardened subterranean command and control facilities within the national borders. This operation was a rapid cross-border evacuation utilizing strategic airlift assets. In the rigorous domain of strategic intelligence analysis, this specific distinction is absolutely critical. Relocation to fortified domestic bunkers indicates a governing body that still possesses operational confidence, assessing the immediate crisis as a manageable event that can be weathered from within the territorial boundary. A full evacuation signifies a definitive, irrecoverable conclusion by that same leadership that the crisis has geometrically exceeded all known parameters of domestic control, rendering the sovereign territory undefendable. In Washington, D.C., the encrypted communications and telemetry data received from the Gulf region encountered a National Security Council that was entirely lacking a viable, pre-formulated contingency matrix for an event of this specific velocity and scale. The 90-minute operational window, the total and systematic neutralization of critical infrastructure, and the complete systemic failure of the deployed multi-billion-dollar Patriot and THAAD defense arrays induced an immediate and pervasive command paralysis across the American defense establishment. This event was not merely a localized military engagement, it functioned as a definitive operational verdict on the entire structural concept of utilizing external security guarantees to maintain the balance of power in the Persian Gulf. To comprehend the sheer efficiency of this regional realignment, one must meticulously dissect the operational architecture of the campaign. The offensive matrix utilized a highly synchronized, 3-phase targeting sequence specifically designed by aerospace engineers to induce maximum cascading failure across interconnected systems. The initial operational wave, comprising an estimated 120 hypersonic glide munitions, specifically engaged the Jebel Ali port complex. Post-strike satellite telemetry and localized damage assessments confirm the absolute and total neutralization of the facility's operational capacity. The port's 95 massive container handling cranes, representing the largest and most concentrated logistical array anywhere in the Middle East, sustained direct, high-velocity kinetic impacts. These strikes structurally severed the main vertical supports, causing the immense steel frameworks to collapse immediately onto the concrete dock surfaces and into the surrounding deep-water maritime channels, permanently blocking vessel access. The extensive fuel storage and bunkering facilities, a critical energy node responsible for servicing the 15,000 transoceanic vessels that dock at Jebel Ali annually, were engaged through a highly calculated sequential pattern This targeting sequence was not designed to create isolated thermal events, but rather to ensure the complete structural combustion of the fuel reserves, utilizing the proximity of the tanks to generate a self-sustaining firestorm that consumed the entire logistical footprint. Port control networks, automated vessel traffic management systems, and customs data centers were systematically disabled in the opening minutes of the strike through precision targeting of their power substations and fiber optic communication trunks. Jebel Ali officially and permanently ceased to function as a viable maritime logistics node, severing a primary artery of global trade. The second wave of the campaign, deploying approximately 150 specialized units, shifted its operational focus inland to the Dubai Financial District. A dedicated, synchronized package of 6 hypersonic glide vehicles engaged the Burj Khalifa. The targeting sequence applied to this structure was meticulously engineered by structural dynamics specialists to induce a complete, progressive, and unrecoverable structural failure. The initial 2 kinetic impacts penetrated the core, load-bearing concrete and steel elements precisely at the 40th and 80th floor elevations. In advanced structural engineering models, these specific nodal points are calculated to be the most vulnerable to catastrophic load redistribution. The subsequent 4 kinetic impacts were perfectly synchronized with the resulting degradation in structural integrity, striking the compromised sections just as the upper mass began to shift. Observational data and seismic sensors confirmed the complete vertical collapse of the towering structure within a remarkably brief time frame of 23 minutes, bringing hundreds of thousands of tons of material down into a compacted debris field. Simultaneously, the sprawling Dubai International Financial Center experienced parallel kinetic engagements. These secondary strikes neutralized both its primary, heavily cooled data infrastructure and the physical commercial facilities housing the regional headquarters of integrated global banking and insurance institutions, effectively erasing the financial ledgers and communication nodes that bind the Gulf to the Western financial system. The third wave, deploying the final 130 munitions, systematically and clinically dismantled the regional military infrastructure. Al Minhad Air Base, a vital operational hub for 4 deployed coalition forces, sustained direct runway cratering strikes that disabled its primary and secondary aviation launch systems, severely compromised its aviation fuel infrastructure, and leveled heavily reinforced aircraft maintenance facilities. Furthermore, the pre-positioned equipment storage areas, massive climate-controlled warehouses containing hundreds of armored vehicles, artillery pieces, and heavy logistical equipment designated for rapid response deployments by American forces were engaged with specialized, deep-penetrating munitions. These weapons breached the reinforced concrete roofs before detonating, resulting in the massive internal detonation of stored munitions and fuel materiel, ensuring that no ground counteroffensive could be mounted from the Emirates' territory. The catastrophic failure of the deployed air defense network requires independent, highly technical analysis, as it carries the most profound long-term strategic implications of the entire operational campaign. The targeted region hosts the absolute densest concentration of American-supplied integrated air defense systems anywhere in the Middle East, positioned specifically to counter this exact threat vector. Operational telemetry and post-event data analysis indicate that the failure to achieve any meaningful interception rates was not a product of simple mechanical malfunction, radar downtime, or human operator error. It resulted directly from a fundamental, insurmountable physical mismatch between the design parameters of the defensive systems and the extreme flight characteristics of the incoming offensive munitions. The Terminal High Altitude Area Defense THAAD system is strictly engineered for the exo-atmospheric interception of traditional ballistic missiles operating on highly predictable parabolic trajectories. The hypersonic glide vehicles utilized in this specific campaign operate entirely on endo-atmospheric trajectories, maintaining flight paths within the Earth's atmosphere while possessing continuous, unpredictable maneuvering capabilities. This aerodynamic reality effectively renders THAAD's advanced interception geometry entirely obsolete, as the incoming targets never enter the altitude parameters required for engagement. The Patriot PAC-3 system, designed primarily for endo-atmospheric point defense against slower cruise missiles and short-range ballistic threats, faced an impossible mathematical and physical timeline. When attempting to engage hypersonic glide systems traveling at terminal velocities between Mach 10 and Mach 15, the processing and mechanical limits of these defensive arrays are structurally exceeded. At Mach 12, the extreme aerodynamic heating generated by atmospheric friction creates a dense plasma sheath around the vehicle's hull. This plasma layer absorbs and scatters radar waves, significantly reducing the vehicle's radar cross-section to near stealth levels, making early tracking highly intermittent. Complex trajectory models indicate that the flight time from the absolute edge of the Patriot radar's reliable engagement envelope to the point of physical target impact is approximately 4 seconds. A 4-second window is fundamentally insufficient for any automated computing architecture, let alone a human-operated command structure, to confirm a stable radar track, authorize a complex firing solution, mechanically launch an interceptor missile, and allow that interceptor to close the physical distance. The defensive outcome is mathematically decided and finalized long before the targeted system can even register its initiation. This immense technical challenge was exponentially compounded by the utilization of a saturation strike methodology. 400 simultaneous units, arriving from highly varied vectors and altitudes, immediately overwhelmed the multi-target tracking and processing capacity of the defensive computing architectures, forcing the systems into localized lockups. Furthermore, the munitions utilize an advanced terminal guidance system that integrates inertial navigation for the mid-course, satellite constellation updates, and a highly sophisticated multispectral optical seeker for the terminal dive. This optical seeker actively scans, identifies, and locks on to specific physical and architectural features of the target structure, rather than relying on a fixed geographic coordinate. This reliance on physical visual mass renders standard GPS spoofing and electronic jamming protocols entirely ineffective. The immediate operational paralysis observed in Washington was completely dictated by unyielding physical, geographic, and economic constraints rather than a simple lack of political resolve. The established escalation ladder, long relied upon by defense planners, had reached a terminal rung. Direct kinetic retaliation against Iranian sovereign territory or launch facilities carried the calculated absolute risk of triggering a complete and immediate closure of the Strait of Hormuz. The global economic architecture, already operating on fragile margins, mathematically cannot sustain the sudden removal of 20% of the world's daily petroleum supply and the severing of natural gas shipments. Expanding the conflict to target Iranian naval or military assets within the Gulf theater presented the unacceptable risk of exposing the remaining highly concentrated American logistical hubs in the region, specifically the sprawling Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar and the Naval Support Activity Base in Bahrain, to the exact same hypersonic strike capabilities that had just systematically dismantled Dubai. The strategic reality became immediately clear. Every subsequent step on the escalation matrix required absorbing immediate, catastrophic consequences that far exceeded the available political capital of any Western administration. Observing this immediate real-time paralysis of their primary security guarantor, the surrounding Gulf states instantaneously initiated a profound and rapid recalibration of their sovereign regional security architectures. The UAE leadership's authorization to initiate a total evacuation within 3 hours stands as the definitive, undeniable strategic indicator of the campaign's success. The national security architecture of the UAE had been meticulously engineered over decades upon 3 interdependent pillars. The first pillar was the presumed deterrent value of the physical American military presence. The second pillar was the constraint of deep economic interdependence, operating on the theory that a $500 billion annual trade flow and massive foreign direct investment would make the city too valuable to the global economy to be attacked. The third pillar was an active multi-vector diplomatic network, maintaining quiet channels with all regional actors Within a single 90-minute window, all three foundational pillars failed concurrently and completely. The military presence failed to deter the launch and failed to defend the airspace. The economic interdependence failed to constrain Iranian targeting parameters, as the adversary's internal calculus determined that the operational and strategic advantages of neutralizing the American proxy hub far outweighed the temporary cost of international economic disruption. The diplomatic channels provided absolutely zero early warning telemetry, nor did they offer any mechanism for last-minute operational restraint. When a sovereign state's complete defensive, economic, and diplomatic architecture is neutralized simultaneously, initiating a cross-border evacuation is not an act of panic. It is a highly calculated, rational, operational response to a terminal scenario. This sequence provides permanent empirical data demonstrating that a national security apparatus, heavily dependent on external military guarantees, functions essentially as a geopolitical lease agreement, one where the guarantor's capabilities, commitments, and willingness to absorb damage may abruptly expire at the exact moment the localized threat reaches its maximum threshold. This localized systemic collapse immediately generated massive strategic ripples across the entire Eurasian landmass. Saudi Arabia, observing the undeniable operational vulnerability of its own critical coastal oil processing infrastructure to identical hypersonic systems, rapidly accelerated its bilateral diplomatic engagements with Tehran, utilizing Chinese facilitation channels with unprecedented urgency. Qatar, recognizing the immediate threat to its own national survival, initiated urgent internal strategic assessments regarding the extreme exposure of its localized airspace and began seriously questioning the long-term viability of hosting highly visible foreign military assets that act as primary target nodes. Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman began executing similar rapid policy recalibrations, distancing themselves from confrontational postures. The American alliance structure within the Persian Gulf did not simply bend, it began a rapid process of systemic dissolution driven entirely by independent state-level recalculations based purely on the new, unavoidable operational data demonstrated by the hypersonic deployment. Simultaneously, in Beijing, the strategic focus shifted immediately to rapid macroeconomic integration and geopolitical consolidation. With American security guarantees functionally invalidated and proven hollow in a high-intensity kinetic environment, the Chinese diplomatic paradigm, characterized by deep economic partnership, infrastructure development, and technological integration absent of rigid political conditionality or military threats, emerged instantly as the primary, highly attractive alternative for establishing a new regional order. Concurrently, the operational data from the strike validated long-term Russian strategic investments in the region, the years of quiet technology transfers, the sharing of advanced metallurgical sciences, and the provision of diplomatic buffering at the United Nations had enabled the Iranian defense industrial base to reach its current massive operational scale without triggering preemptive Western containment strikes. The macroeconomic consequences introduced immediate, severe inflationary variables across all global markets. The total neutralization of the Jebel Ali port complex instantly removed the primary, most efficient logistical node connecting the highly integrated Asian, African, and European supply chains. Logistical modeling immediately indicated that physically rerouting these immense daily cargo volumes to secondary, less efficient ports requires a multi-month transition period, injecting substantial processing delays, fuel expenditures, and operational costs into the fragile global system. Maritime insurance syndicates in London and globally immediately recalculated and drastically elevated risk premiums for all commercial vessel operations entering the Gulf, guaranteeing massive upward pressure on energy and consumer commodity prices worldwide. The physical 23-minute collapse of the Burj Khalifa serves as the ultimate, undeniable physical metric for this architectural failure of Western deterrence. The cross-border evacuation of an allied host government provides the definitive historical assessment of what external security guarantees are actually worth when subjected to a saturation level, technologically advanced campaign. The resulting geopolitical environment permanently concludes the era of enforced strategic subordination in the region, forcing an immediate global transition toward models prioritizing hard self-reliance and the rapid integration of new multipolar security framework.